Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. In a warning to the Western nations, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia would use its nuclear arsenal if it was struck with conventional missiles by Ukraine. He added that Moscow would consider it to be a joint attack if any of the Western nuclear powers supported the missile attacks by Ukraine. A non-nuclear nation, Putin's comments and threats come on the back of reports that Kyiv was seeking the approval of the United States and UK to use long-range Western missiles against Russia.
The updated version of the document proposes that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear weapon state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear weapon state, should be regarded as a joint attack on the Russian Federation. The conditions for Russia's transition to the use of nuclear weapons are also clearly defined. We will consider such a possibility as soon as we receive reliable information about a massive launch of aerospace attack means and their crossing of our state border, meaning strategic or tactical aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, hypersonic missiles, and other aircraft.
We're now joined by Ambassador Kawal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary and Chancellor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Robert Sufer, Senior Fellow of Forward Defence Practice at Atlantic Council Snowcroft Centre for Strategy and Security, and Major General Dhruv Katoch, Director at the India Foundation and Director Emeritus at Clause. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, gentlemen. Robert Sufer, if I can begin with you. What do you think about the timing of this change in the nuclear doctrine by President Putin?
For having me on. I think what Putin is after here is he's trying to discourage Ukraine's Western allies from supporting strikes against Russia, particularly with the long-range systems that you mentioned. I'm not sure this is a great change from Russia's nuclear doctrine of 2020. The bottom line is that Russia would use nuclear weapons only if the existence of the state was at risk. And it's hard to imagine that Ukrainian strikes, even with long-range conventional systems, would pose such a threat. So I think it's more about responding to the deliberation here in the United States as to whether or not to allow Ukraine to use these longer-range systems. But I don't see it as a change or a lowering of the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons.
All right. Ambassador Sibal, you've got President Putin who has said that even a state like Ukraine, if it gets support from a nuclear power and uses missiles against Russia, and there is a critical threat to Russia, then Russia can use nuclear weapons in defense. So they've changed and added a number of areas or military threats where nuclear weapons can be used. Do you see this as a significant departure, a significant signal to the West?
I think so, because his earlier warnings about Russia being compelled to use nuclear weapons if there was an existential threat to Russia have not been taken seriously. And this is not the first time that he's spoken about the inherent nuclear dangers in this conflict. Several times he's mentioned this with a view to discouraging the West from upping the ante and escalating the war against Russia to a point where Russia genuinely begins to feel seriously threatened. Now, these warnings have not been taken seriously. I've seen Western commentators, serious ones, saying that Putin is bluffing, and we should not fall in for this bluff. And actually, serious people have been saying this, that he's just discouraging us, the West, from using the nuclear weapons, and we should go ahead and do it. The British have been very vocal about this at very senior level, the former defense secretaries and everything else. Lavrov, in many statements, has said that the West doesn't seem to be taking our concerns about attacks on Russia leading to the kind of escalation that will require the use of some kind of nuclear weapons seriously, that they laugh it away. So I think in this background, I think Putin has felt that it was time to send a more significant signal to the West. And this he's doing because there's a lot of pressure that is being built up. So far, the Americans have resisted it. that Zelensky should be allowed to use long-range missiles to hit deep into Russian territory. Now, of course, the range of these missiles is 300 kilometers. So it will not be deep into Russian territory. But the argument on the Western side is that they will attack the bases, the ammunition dumps, the airports, their bases and everything else, and therefore reduce pressure on Ukraine of aerial attacks by Russia. But what Putin has said, and that's important, that if they have information that there is a massive attack, so he's not saying that if there is a missile attack here or there or a few missiles there or there would necessitate him to use nuclear weapons, but if there is a massive attack, so he's keeping margin for maneuver for himself. Now, you know, the British have been pushing very hard for the use of these. The Americans have been a little more reticent. They see the consequences of this. I understand. I don't have any hard information on this. I understand that that Russia has used its own channels to convey a very strong message to the United States of the risks that would be involved if the United States went ahead and gave this green light to Zelensky. Now,
let me also get a comment to that, sir.
Yes.
Let me get a quick comment from Robert Sufa and Lieutenant General Katoch on that. Robert Sufa, do you think this crosses a sort of a red line for the United States? Are they going to take note of this? Will there be any kind of change in stance vis-a-vis Ukraine? Because the US, in a way, is indirectly involved in a war in the Middle East. Would they risk being drawn into a direct war in Europe as well?
Well, you're right. The United States will look very carefully at this and will not want to be drawn into a major war. But let me just say that the United States understands Russia's nuclear doctrine. We have been watching it for some time now. It is a doctrine that does include the limited use of low-yield nuclear weapons. They have the capabilities. They have land, air, and sea-based nuclear forces that can be used on the battlefield. So this is not new, right? And so we take this into account when we formulate our own doctrine. And what we do is to provide NATO and the American president a range of nuclear options that can be used in response to a potential Russian use. So Putin has to understand as well that should he escalate to the use of nuclear weapons, and of course there's only one person that can decide whether and how to respond, and that is the president of the United States, but he has a range of capabilities, and his intent will be, I think, to try to, shall we say, demonstrate resolve and show that whatever led Putin to think that he could use nuclear weapons and secure an advantage, that was false, and that it was time now to stop further escalation or risk a broader nuclear conflagration, which would not be in Putin's interest.
Right. General Katoch, how do you think this is going to be seen on the battlefield? This is clearly sending a message out to the United States, to Western powers. Russia would want to say that they're sending a message out to their enemy. But how would you explain these tactics right now as to what this means on the battlefield?
Thank you. Very frankly, in my opinion, I think it is very clear messaging. I don't think that President Putin at this point of time is very keen to escalate the situation. But at the same time, I think it will be a red line as far as President Putin is concerned if a large number of long-range missiles are actually provided to Ukraine and they start using them in depth targets in Russia. That will be a red line, and he has to answer to his people. So the question is, one of the panelists has very clearly said that we know Russia's doctrine, and it appears to be a bluff. That may be so, but what happens if it isn't a bluff? What happens if he's actually driven to the wall and he uses it? Then obviously there will be a retaliation. Then how do we control the situation after that? I think it may totally spiral out of control. So I think it would be wise on the part of the West not to go along that road. They've got to stop before that. And I think that there is great sense in stopping Ukraine from using any of the long-range weapons which the West can supply. So from the West side, I mean, I personally feel they should not supply those weapons. Otherwise, the risk of escalation is too great. And while Russia will suffer, that is for granted, the US and the West will suffer equally. And if it goes beyond the threshold level, then the whole world will suffer. It is not going to stop there. So I think we should pull back the nuclear trigger from both sides. And it behoves the United States at this point of time not to fall into President Zelensky's tactics of trying to get more people into the war, to draw them into the war. That is one. Number two, I have a feeling, it's also related to the US elections because there is a feeling that if President Trump comes in, there will be a marked change. So let's see as to how that plays out. In my view, for the next month or so, I don't see any major changes coming out, either in terms of the Russian threat or in terms of actual supply of these weapons by the United States.
Right.
Prediction.
Ambassador Sibal, what do you think can possibly happen? Do you think, considering that we're just a few weeks away from the US election result on the 5th of November, do you think President Biden may just like to wait this out for a few months, make sure that these long-range missiles are not used by Ukraine, see how things go, and then probably take a call?
Before I answer that, there's one important point that Putin has been making, which needs to be mentioned, which is this, that Ukraine itself does not have the capacity, the technical know-how to use these long-range weapons. This will require the presence of Western military personnel on the ground, and that the Storm Shadows and others, for their targeting and everything else, with the satellite signaling and everything else, intelligence that has to be provided by the West. That's why he's saying that if Ukraine uses this, he's presupposing that they will use this with the active participation of Western instructors and Western technological inputs, which means that they are involved in this. That is one. The other is that Russia is not going to use nuclear weapons carelessly, not at all. I don't think Russia has any intention to do that. He's just sending a very serious warning. And insofar as the United States is concerned, so far, they have not given the green light either to Zelensky or to Europe, that is UK, to go ahead and allow the use of these missiles by Ukraine. Now, we have, as you know, Biden has just announced that $8 billion of assistance will now be given to Ukraine, because otherwise it will lapse, plus another 1.2 billion or something additional military aid to Ukraine. So they are staying below the threshold of allowing or giving a green light to Zelensky to use these long-range missiles, for which he's been pushing very hard, because he wants to involve NATO. Now you see Germany is getting cold feet, and Scholz has said very clearly that he will not accept the use of these weapons against Russia.
All right, we're going to take a short break. Gentlemen, we'll request you to stay with us. We'll step into a break, but when we return, we will be discussing with all our three guests Russia's plan to reportedly set up a secret war drone project in China. Don't go anywhere. We will be discussing the consequences of that on Global Eye. Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. Russia has set up a secret weapons program in China, which will be used to build long-range attack drones. These drones will be reportedly used in its war with Ukraine. As per a report by Reuters, the program has been set up by a subsidiary of a Russian state-owned arms company. The company has made and flight tested a new drone model in China. China's foreign ministry told Reuters that it was not aware of any such project, while the US government has expressed deep concerns. The US National Security Council said it has not seen anything yet to suggest China was aware of these transactions or that there was a government involvement in facilitating the production of these lethal weapons. We continue to have our conversation with Ambassador Kawal Sibal, Robert Sufa, and Major General Dhruv Katoch as well. Robert Sufa, if I were to begin with you, how seriously do you take these reports about Russia having a secret drone project in China? The US has been worried all along that the components that are being used in Russian weapon systems right now, a large extent, at least 70% of them are coming from China. So would you dismiss these reports outright?
Would not dismiss the reports. I haven't studied the reports, so I don't know their validity, but this is just further evidence of the collusion, the collaboration between Russia and China. You know that for the first time ever in our annual our nuclear posture review and our national security strategy, we've made the point here in the United States that we need to deter now two major nuclear powers, both Russia and China. And this is just another example of how it's important that we now take into account the growing Chinese threat and the possibility that we could be engaged in a conflict against both countries, either simultaneously or near sequentially.
Right. General Katoch, how do you think this is going to change China's role or the world's perception of China's role in this war? Could this be a build-up towards sanctioning China or maybe calling out China for its support to Russia?
Well, very frankly, China has completely denied this story. And as far as the US is concerned, the State Department has also not confirmed it. So there is a doubt as to what exactly has happened. But one statement which comes out that, they say that the Chinese government is not aware of it. Now, if there is some facility in China, there is no way in which the Chinese government will not be aware of what is happening. So to that extent, that statement itself appears to be, which has been issued, quite absurd. But there is a point. You see, China has been supplying components and sub-components to Russia as far as their war effort is concerned. And all these are dual-use items. They are actually supplying the engines for the Gapriya A1 drone, which is again a kamikaze drone, and it's a long-range kamikaze drone. Now this is the upscaled version of that particular drone. So firstly, I don't understand why should Russia even think of manufacturing it in China when you can manufacture it in Russia? It doesn't make sense. And why should even China go down that road unless they wish to have a joint production or something? So to me, there are too many question marks as far as this is concerned. But should it actually work out, should it actually be proved to be true, then I'm afraid China will open itself to sanctions. Those sanctions will be very severe. And considering their current economic situation, they will be deeply impacted. Whether China has taken the risk to go down that road or whether this is just a make-believe story as of now, time will tell. But at the moment, it is all, there is no confirmation yet as to what exactly is happening on the ground. Parikshit.
Right. Ambassador Sybil, how worried would you be about a situation like this? On one hand, Russia revising its nuclear doctrine to send out a message to the West. Secondly, reports emerging that Russia and China are colluding to make drones which are being used to attack Ukraine. So what are your thoughts in terms of the larger dangers involved?
Well, firstly, even if they're manufacturing together these drones, this is not in the same category as nuclear weapons and doesn't pose that kind of a threat. Maybe their drones will become more efficient and will be able to reach deeper into Ukrainian territory, whether they'll be able to penetrate the Ukrainian defenses because they have become pretty powerful with the aid of the West is an open question. Secondly, these reports, to my mind, first of all, I have no direct knowledge. I can only speculate. I would say that this is the kind of disinformation that is coming out from Western news agencies, prompted by certain interests who want to create the impression that China and Russia are collaborating and speculatively preempt the possibility of China actually getting involved in this kind of collaboration with Russia. Thirdly, the word collusion and this and that, but, from the outside, I don't see why, if the whole of Europe, NATO, United States can supply arms to Ukraine to fight Russia, to impose a strategic defeat in Russia, and there is so much moral breast beating if China supports Russia. Why? Why can't China support Russia? Now, by the same logic. And finally, sanctions. It's easy to sanction Russia because Russia has been sanctioned since the 70s, or the Soviet Union has been sanctioned. So, and there's not much trade. Of course, with Europe, there was considerable oil trade and this and that. Otherwise, between the United States and Russia, there hasn't been much trade. But look at the volume of trade between United States and China. It is the biggest trade partner, about $750 billion of trade both ways. And then China is now controlling certain very critical technologies, and they're holding them back. And this is causing concern in the West. So if imposing sanctions on China will not be that cost-free a step as in the case of Russia, and the West would have to think more than once before they do it, and Europe would be terribly affected if China hits back. So I would again say that this is actually disinformation, and even if it is not disinformation, I can't see why there should be so much objection to China to also support Russia, because China is the next target of the United States. Openly, they're saying that China is their principal enemy.
Right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the program. Clearly, we are in times of war, and you see different kinds of warfare on both in the battlefield, in the cyber world, and in the media as well. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sybil, Robert Kufer, and also General Katoch for joining us on the program. With that, we've come to the end of Global Eye, but we will keep tracking all big international stories for you through the next week, and keep joining us on Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.